Hello, you're listening to Poured Over, the Barnes& Noble podcast. My name is Chris Gillespie. My guest today is a New York Times bestselling author whose books have sold 60 million copies worldwide and have been translated into 51 languages. He's got a terrific new book out this February entitled Wolf Hour. Jo Nesbø, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited to talk to you about Wolf Hour today. I've been reading it over the past few weeks and I've really enjoyed it. Not only is it an engrossing mystery and thriller, it's also a compelling character drama and a powerful reflection on loneliness, grief, trust, and connection. It is also notably your first novel ever set in America. You've been writing books for nearly 30 years. What inspired you to set a novel in America at this point in your career?
It's definitely my background. I grew up in the United States, but living in Norway, and the reason is that my father grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and with my grandparents, and when they went back to Norway, they brought American culture with them and sort of American attitude. So when I grew up, I was so influenced by, American culture, books, music, literature that my father brought to our home. And since I also had relatives living in the United States, I wouldn't say I felt half American, but I definitely felt that I had a strong bond to America. And also over the last 20, 30 years, I've been traveling so much in the United States. I think I have probably, or I had definitely visited more American states than the average American. So I decided I wanted to write a book. Now, not being American, not being, born and raised in the United States, it would have to be an outsider's look at American culture.
Mhm.
But I would claim that it's an informed outsiders look at America. But I did that in my first two novels in the Harry Hole series. Also, I went to Australia and then to Thailand, and it has certain advantages having that outsiders look at a setting for a crime mystery like this. It has its disadvantages also, of course, but it was something I was ready to try.
I think in preparing for today, I saw that you wrote the first Harry Hole novel when you had just arrived in Australia. It seemed like something had really sparked your imagination or inspired you going on that trip, and you kind of that was the jumping off point. And so it sounds like you find a lot of inspiration in traveling and that it's a big part of your creative process.
Yeah, definitely. Actually, the first Harry Hole novel was set in Australia because I happened to be traveling there. It
Hmm.
wasn't a decision because it was just me testing writing a crime novel. But then in my second novel, when I went to Bangkok, that was definitely the plan to have Bangkok being a almost like a character in a novel, and that's also the case in with Wolf Hour. Is
Hmm.
that I do use Minnesota and Minneapolis as a character almost in the story.
And I do want to ask why, out of all of the cities in America, or even if we narrowed it down to cities in the Midwest or the upper Midwest, how did you land on Minneapolis as kind of being the setting? Your first novel set in America.
Mm. Well, it's simply because it's the state where most Scandinavians emigrated. It has a large Norwegian, Swedish, and Danish population. So when coming there, I felt almost at home, or actually, it was like in some way it was like a time travel back in time when you come to Minnesota, especially to the more conservative Christian communities of Scandinavians. It feels a bit like being in Norway in the countryside 40, 50 years ago. They have, it's like the Norwegian traditions that they have brought with them and that they kept proudly is mostly traditions that we no longer have in Norway. So so it was really interesting. But also, of course, the language. They have a beer in Minneapolis, and I don't know if this is by coincidence, but it's called Utepils, and it's seems like it's directly translated from Norwegian. That's in the springtime when it finally gets warm enough, so you can go outside and have a beer outside. It's called Utepils.
So it's interesting that the traditions and culture from Norway and other Scandinavian countries are almost like put into a time capsule by coming to America, in that while things change and evolve back over in Norway and Sweden and Finland, those traditions are almost kind of frozen in time by coming over to America. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I even think it's interesting the way American culture has been um, imported back to Norway. So, like my father and my grandparents did, and also we see in some parts of Norway that they have, American cars. They listen to American music. Um, they speak. Many of the words are like trunk, for example, has been imported to Norway, some parts of Norway, and in some houses they have porches, which is like unheard of in Norway. So we have all these, charming American features mixed with the Norwegian culture.
What I think is really cool about Wolf Hour and reading the book, as someone who has traveled somewhat within the United States, but I've not made it to Minneapolis, is that I think you do a really great job of capturing that sort of blending or merging of two cultures, because the main character, Bob Oz, is of Norwegian descent. There's that language and the food and words and names that are all kind of woven into that sort of sense of the city and that sense of place and the story. But it does feel like it is written by someone who is very familiar with the city and with America, and it's not necessarily written like someone is not familiar with America, has not been, who's writing a story set in America, um, that is maybe playing up on tropes or stereotypes or things like that. Like it feels very much like an authentic portrayal of the city. Um, as someone who has studied Minneapolis and has researched it and has visited it, do you have any idea? Right now, when we're recording this, Minneapolis is in the headlines and in the news quite a bit because of the civil unrest that's going on there with the protests and the violence against the protesters. But it's not the first time that Minneapolis has been sort of the epicenter of that kind of news or political or civil unrest in America. Is there anything unique about the city or the factors, or I'm not sure, that goes into maybe making it? Because it just seems so odd to me that out of all the cities in America and in the Midwest, that Minneapolis kind of continues to be the epicenter for this sort of change or these political moments.
Mm. Well, I could have chosen New York, where my father grew up.
Mm.
I could have chosen Los Angeles, which is the city in which I spend most time when traveling in the United States. Um, I chose Minneapolis both because of its Scandinavian roots, and also because it's sort of in the middle of nowhere. I'm not saying that Minnesota or Minneapolis is nowhere, but
Mm.
it's a kind of city that people outside the United States doesn't know that well. They know that Prince is from Minneapolis, but New Orleans, Chicago, Boston, cities like that will be very much more known. So it gives me sort of a freedom to create my own universe. I don't have to sort of compete with or being compared to other writers who have used those other cities. Um, so I have these blank sheets on which I can create a universe, but still, of course, staying true to the actual Minneapolis. Um, just like with the Harry Hole series, I feel free to uh, create a sort of twisted version of Oslo. Sort of Oslo is like Disneyland after dark, while Minneapolis is also a city that I have felt free to use my imagination. I do have spent time there doing research, been traveling around. All the places and sites that are described in the book is, of course, from Minneapolis,
Mhm.
but it's fiction. It's fiction, and I use the city is there for my purpose, not the other way around.
It is sort of an interesting city. I mean, I think there's probably a lot of different cities that would fit the bill for this, specifically in America. But I think to your point about um, maybe the value of not setting the story in one of the bigger cities or more well known or I don't want to say overdone cities, but I think Minneapolis is the sort of cultural mixing pot between sort of the you have the Scandinavian settlers from decades ago, but then you also have, as you write about in the book, new waves of immigrants coming in and new types of people, those cultures interacting, but then you also have a degree of it's this big metropolis set in a largely rural area, so you kind of have urban and rural colliding,
Mm,
as well as different political ideologies that come along with that. So that it is sort of this kind of really ultimate mixing pot. I could see how that could be a very fun playground to set a story and to try to set up what is a very compelling plot and a mystery in this book, because at its heart it is a mystery thriller, but it is such a vivid portrait of the city and also such a compelling character study of these different characters, especially the main character, Bob Oz. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about who Bob is, what's going on in his life when we first meet him, and sort of what his emotional arc kind of is over the course of the story.
yeah. Well, Bob Oz is in some ways a bit similar to my main character in the Harry Hole series.
Hmm.
He's a police detective. Um, he is working homicide, but he's a womanizer. Harry's not that much of a womanizer, but this guy Bob Oz, he is, and he's having trouble with alcohol. Now. That's it when we compare them. Not many similarities. Bob Harry is a charming guy that's sort of withdrawn but easy to like. He doesn't talk a lot, but when he talks, you listen. Bob also is the opposite. He's a pathetic loser. He's not. He has no charm. He has no good looks, and he talks way too much and without thinking. Harry is a brilliant, smart detective. Bob Ross is at best mediocre. Um,
Hmm.
but what he does have is a tenacity, and that goes both for his work and how he gets his way with women. It's a big mystery where it works. How can he find all these women and have his will with all these women? And it's about him talking and talking and talking until they get so tired they just let him have his way. That's sort of the theory. So he has gained the nickname One Night Bob, uh, or that was the name he used to have, spending one night with every woman
Hmm.
until he met his wife, and then he became One Woman Bob. And as we meet him, the marriage has fallen apart. There's a tragedy that we haven't learned about yet. That is the reason for this. And he's trying to get back to being one-eyed Bob, but he's a bit older, a bit slower. He's even less good looking now, and so he's a pathetic man, and he's hated at the police station because he refuses to carry a weapon. There's a reason for that also, which they take as a sign of him being covered. Um, Now that is the Bobos that we meet, and of course, in most stories, you have the principle of saving the cat, meaning that in Hollywood movies, you have the protagonist do a symbolic act in the first 20 minutes that makes sure the audience will root for this character, um, like saving a cat or following an old woman across the street. I'd say the opposite with Bobos. I'm having him kill the cat in the first 20 pages. And then the rest of the story is, of course, trying to convince the reader that there is solid moral ground down there, something in this character. He
Mhm.
is actually a guy who has some redeeming features, and he is able to get back on his horse and to again become uh, the good guy that he actually is.
I think what I appreciated about him as a character was that although he might be flawed, I think almost those flaws make him endearing or more likable, at least for me, because I think as a character, there's sort of uh the trope or the archetype in a lot of mystery thrillers where the protagonist is a detective who has like is not a superhero but has superhuman abilities, whether it's their memory or knowledge or observation, those things that are fun to read sometimes, but maybe are maybe not the most realistic or relatable. But I think with Bob Oz, and I guess I don't know what this says about me after your description of him, but I was like, oh, okay, like I feel for this guy, especially over the course of the story as you learn more about his history, what happened. Um, he kind of becomes someone who I think in my mind was struggling and was trying to do the right thing, but was having a hard time always living up to that or being able to meet that standard, which I think is probably the space that most of us occupy because we're most of us are not super spies or super detectives, but most of us are just trying to do our best and kind of overcome our own flaws.
Yeah, well, I think that what saves him at the end of the day is
Hmm.
that he doesn't take himself too seriously, and he has a sense of humor. And I think that um, I once discussed this with a famous film director, and we talked about the principle of saving the cat. And
Hmm.
he claimed, and I think rightly so, that the way to make an audience sympathize with the character is giving the character a problem. It could be any kind of problem. It could be just a simple mechanical problem. And his example was the murderer in Psycho when he's trying to push a car with a dead body in the trunk, I think, is trying to push it into a lake. I mean, this is the bad guy, but he's having trouble, pushing the car,
Hmm.
and you can see the audience in the cinema. They are like trying to help this guy push that car because he has a problem. And I think it's the same thing with Bob Oz. You can relate to him and you like him because you are subconsciously trying to help him solve his problems.
Speaking of problems, the problem that Bob Oz and his colleagues, I mean, aside from his own interpersonal problems or internal problems, the big problem of the story is this crime that's going on, this murder that's taken place that devolves into a series of murders. Can you tell us a little bit about what the key crime in the story is and what Bob and his colleagues at the Minneapolis Police Department are up against in Wolf Hour?
Well, it's a shooting. It starts with a shooting in a project, and um, they can see the shooter quite early on in the surveillance cameras. So it doesn't feel like a who's done it story. They quite quickly identify this guy who was living in his apartment in the project and did the shooting from his window of that apartment. They also find a um, a business card from a taxidermy shop in Minneapolis, And when Barbos goes to this shop, he finds out that this guy has delivered his dead cat um, to have it stuffed
Hmm.
and sort of brought back to life. Um, so he's expecting the murderer to show up at the taxidermist shop and to get his cat. So he hangs around there. And this was very early on on the novel. I decided that this taxidermy shop will be sort of a center. It will be the eye of the storm, where everything is quiet. You walk into that shop and it's all quiet. It's just dead animals, beautiful dead animals, posing. There's nobody there. It's like walking into a church. And then he meets the taxidermist, who, like Bobos, is of Scandinavian descent. Um, he is also a lonely man, and he's also waiting for this guy to pick up his cat. And while waiting for him, these two men start having conversations about their lives, uh, about society, and about grief and about loneliness. And this is while there's a whirlwind of brutal violence around them, uh, murder, racism, uh, Protestants, and uh, corruption in the police force. Uh, this is like Bobos going to confession in the church with this Mike Lunde, and uh, so it almost became like a. I probably enjoyed more having these conversations. I think that was my favorite part of writing that book. Those conversations within that taxidermy shop. It just so happened when I was there, I didn't come across a taxidermy shop in Minneapolis. Actually, it was in Wisconsin, and but I had that feeling when I walked in there that okay, this is this is a place that need to be in a novel.
It is sort of, I guess, if you think about a taxidermy shop, it is sort of this kind of, um, like I'm thinking about that. I forget which exactly culture or tradition it's from, but the idea of the bardo of the land between the living and the dead, sort of like a taxidermy shop. You're surrounded by at once death. It's a lot of dead animals, like you said, but it's also these animals that have sort of been in this weird frozen way brought back to life, or they're pretending to be alive, or they're exuding life. Like it creates this kind of really interesting tension for a space. And yeah, it works as this really amazing kind of shelter in the story, or this kind of key part where that allows the characters to sort of dive deeper or kind of go into those other themes and explore those issues of loneliness and grief and connection in a way that really complements and informs the rest of the kind of suspenseful thriller plot throughout the rest of the story. We're having these respites in between. Um, I think it's interesting that I mean, loneliness is a not necessarily a universal human condition, but it's something that everyone can experience, has been around for a long time, will continue to be around. But I think specifically now, people talk about there being like a loneliness epidemic with things going on with just the way that technology has changed or culture has changed, specifically after the pandemic. But what's really interesting to me about the story is that the story is set in 2016, which is 4 years before the pandemic, but it feels like it almost has this very sort of post-pandemic feeling to it of this kind of lingering
Mm.
sadness and confusion and loneliness. Do you feel like any of that post-pandemic thought kind of crept into 2016, or I mean, people were still lonely and grieving in 2016, but it feels like it is something much more timely about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, loneliness has been around for a long time, like you said. And it's
Yeah.
uh, I was that was actually when traveling in the United States. I remember there was a hotel chain that offered you a goldfish in a bowl to take to your hotel room, so to keep you company. And that may have influenced this novel also because in this taxidermy shop, people are bringing their pets to have them stuffed so that
Hmm.
they can keep them. So you get this feeling that okay, so they're so lonely that they don't even have like a live pet. They have dead pets, in their
Oh,
apartments. So yes, that was definitely part of it. The Minneapolis that I visited after the pandemic was very different from the city I had visited before, both because of the pandemic, because of the protests, the racial unrest, and the murder that had taken place there.
hmm.
Um, which is also a backdrop for this story because it's sort of told through Norwegian who is visiting the city after the events have taken place. It's set in time just before the presidential election, where everybody thinks that Hillary Clinton is going to win. And there is this guy, Donald Trump, who's running for president, and nobody believes he will be elected. Um, so, so it's set in a point in time where things definitely will change. Um, there's a before and after, um, and
Hmm.
the story, as it's told with Bob Oz, is before, and it's written or told from the perspective of someone um, uh, going to visit the city where he used to go when he grew up as a Norwegian, having relatives in that city.
And it's also interesting, like thinking about the taxidermy shop and what you're saying about not only is it a having a pet that is immortalized in taxidermy is a way of at least having some form of, I guess, imaginary companion, sort of. But as you say that, it also occurred to me that it's sort of going into the theme of grief. It's sort of like a shortcut, or what people might hope would be this way of sidestepping the grieving process of having to go through the really painful, uncomfortable process of acknowledging loss and letting something go and acknowledging that someone or something has come to an end or is no longer around. But through the magic of taxidermy, you can kind of almost convince yourself that they're still around in some weird way and sort of spare yourself that actual real painful uncomfortable part of being human, which is grief.
Hmm. Well, it's I ended up using so many metaphors from taxidermy. It's like when I did research, I understood that the most difficult part was to get the eyes correctly. If you could
Yeah.
get the eyes correctly, you were home free. Then you had done your job. But it was hard to find producers of ice that were really really good. And it was I understand that okay, so what they're looking for is that spark of life in the eyes. It had to be there. This that you could imagine that they're here, they're alive, they're still with me. And it's that grief and that loneliness that you won't let go. And that is exactly the situation that Bob also is in. I think
Mm.
it's fair for the listeners here to give a spoiler that the reason why his marriage broke up was because they lost their little daughter in a gun accident. She happened to take his gun when she was at home and he was not at home, and that killed her. And it's that grief that is haunting both Bob and his wife, and that is what you can see in the eyes of the taxidermist. It's that same kind of loss.
What really stood out to me too about that, and specifically the loss of Bob's daughter in that particular way, was that I know I'd read in researching you and your work prior to talking today, that you'd said that I read somewhere that you don't set out to write something that's going to be overtly political or overtly political favoring one side or the other. But I think sort of what's really compelling and powerful in the book is that if the overarching or one of the overarching themes is gun violence in America, the flip side of that being gun control, how do we sort of manage the Second Amendment with um, protecting people or acknowledging that guns can also hurt people, obviously, but that unchecked guns are not a great thing. And I think we often think about that in terms of maybe mass shooters. That form of gun violence is maybe what we think of initially, but I think you highlight a very real and very specific and painful other version, another example of the harm that guns have in people's lives and how things that, I mean, in this case, Bob has a gun because he's in law enforcement and it's issued to him by the police station and all of that, but it's still a very painful example of the effect that having a gun in your house can have on your life. Um, do you feel like I know that you said when we started talking that you kind of you feel connected to American culture and American society, but you also sort of, obviously have the European roots and connection. But is the gun problem in America more obvious and pronounced to you as someone who is outside of it a lot of the time?
Well, I think that the gun problem is just as present and problematic and discussed in the United States, or probably even more so than it is in Europe.
Mm,
It's just that it's something that it's so strange for most Europeans that is almost a bit fascinating. I mean, also when traveling in the United States, it's striking as soon as you cross the border to Canada. It's like when it comes to the attitude to not only gun violence but violence in general. It's like having crossed the border to another continent. It feels like you have crossed a big ocean and ended up somewhere totally different. But I think that what I'm trying to do in the book is to address this um, discussion about the freedom of carrying a gun, the freedom of having something to protect you in a society that historically has been the most violent society in Western civilization. It's you can see that for me as an outsider, as a foreigner, it's striking how violence, you may not think about this, but compared to Scandinavia, where I come from, but also in Europe in general, violence is so much more present in the everyday lives of people in the United States than other countries, and well, countries that would be natural to compare you with.
mhm.
So it's I write about that, but I also write about the girl living or growing up in southern parts of Chicago, having a violent father, living in that neighborhood, and having the gun under her pillow as her only protection. That is something that I think Europeans often forget, that there is actually, for some people, a greater need for protection in the United States than it is, for example, growing up in Oslo, Norway.
I think something that I also kind of grapple with as an American or have been thinking about, especially as of late. Like I've been watching the Ken Burns put out a documentary series about the American Revolution, this 6 or 7 part series about the founding of America and the Revolutionary War and everything like that. And I think it's just so apparent to me how violence is almost inherent in our national DNA and fabric because the way that the USA was born was through violence, separating from England, violence against England, but then also violence against the indigenous population that was already here. And it's just really kind of mind boggling. And not that it excuses anything, because I think that after all this time we should be able to evolve past this and progress, but it's like we can't necessarily leave behind that sense of violence, or I guess more specifically, what also comes along with the sense of the frontier as being part of the American identity, and the idea that, oh, you're going to go out to the frontier, it's going to be dangerous, you're going to need protection against all these things because you're a rugged individualist who's got to cross the continent. And it's hard to like part of it is just it's weird to still be caught up on those things or to have the lingering effect of that. But do you feel like there's any thing from Norwegian history or the like early, I know Europe is much older. A lot of the countries in Europe and societies are so much older than America, but what do you think the history of Norway says about how does the history of Norway influence the Norway of today, if that makes sense?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a student, I studied economic history, and if you have a hammer, all you see are nails.
Mm.
So I try to, or I tend to explain history with the economic situation of the country, and I think that it's not like people aren't different. People are acting the way they do, adapting to a situation, like a historic situation. So I'm by no means saying that Americans are more violent than Norwegians. Actually, some of the like we explained in this podcast, many of the violent Americans are of Norwegian descent. so. So I don't think we're that different. It's just circumstance. I think that violence at some point in Norwegian history, violence wasn't a good tactic to stay alive. It wasn't that needed, I guess. So yeah, um, I, I don't believe in I don't believe in societies and people in general being different from each other. I think we all just adapt to the situation as best we can.
To that point, I had also seen that you had said something about the value of understanding or hearing people that you don't necessarily agree with, maybe their values or their politics, but understanding their underlying values and why that's important. I was wondering if you could sort of speak a little bit about that, because I think that really sort of is at the root of not only the story of Wolf Hour, but also sort of a lot of what we've been talking about today.
Yeah, I think that is what I've been doing with my novels is to try to. I don't think fiction is well suited for giving answers.
Mm.
That some writers do that. I tend to find authors who are trying to explain me or give me answers I find boring. What I find interesting are well-informed writers who are asking interesting questions, questions that I have to try to find alternative answers to myself and test alternative answers. I think that is something that we need in this polarized time of ours. Um, I tried to just like I did in the novel Redbreast with Harry Hole, where I'm writing about Norwegians joining the Germans. I mean, we were occupied by Germany in 1940,
Mm.
and many Norwegians joined the Germans to fight against Russia, which has a border towards Norway, and they were sent to prison after the war for treason, and trying to explain their reasoning and their rationale behind deciding to join the Germans. Um, I try to do that in Wolf Hour also, to try to show how the world looks from different points of views. Um, there's a there's a book by a writer, Hythe, called The Righteous Mind, which is mainly about him being a Democrat, but writing about Republicans and Democrats and how they see each other in the American society right now. And that was an inspiration for me writing this book to try to put yourself in the shoes of someone with whom you definitely don't agree, and try to be positive to their morality and to the reasoning. I think that is something that is needed right now. That we are, instead of digging trenches, to try to visage each other in the trenches.
Absolutely. Looking ahead, do you have any idea if you would revisit the characters in Wolf Hour? Do you think we might see more of Bob Oz, or do you really envision this as a standalone novel?
It was written as a standalone novel,
Hmm.
and but I really like Bob Oz, and so I wouldn't rule out that I would have to go and find out what Bob Oz is up to.
Maybe he goes on vacation to another city, whether that's in America or somewhere else around the world. That could be an option. Do you have any other projects in the works right now that are coming up? I know we're just at the start of 2026. Wolf Hour coming out in hardcover. It's already out when folks are listening to this podcast. Anything else that people can look forward to?
I'm working on a Harry Hole novel right now that
Hmm.
will be published in Norway in the fall, I guess. So hopefully in the United States sometimes next year. And in March there will be a Netflix TV series based on the Harry Hole novels. Um,
Oh,
yeah, so it's going to be a lot of Harry Hole for me for the this year.
how involved are you in the adaptation for that adapting the story for the screen?
Oh, very much so.
Hmm.
For the first time, I've written the scripts, and I'm also the showrunner on the show. So yes,
Oh,
I'm
very,
very.
yeah. How do you enjoy that process compared
Oh,
to
that
like
was
writing a book by yourself?
yeah. It felt like a privilege, but also quite scary to be the showrunner. I mean, I'm with this big crew of very experienced and professional directors and actors, and I'm the only one who doesn't really know my job, and I'm supposed to run the thing. So that's been challenging, but great fun and a great experience. And hopefully we made something good.
That's awesome. And that's going to be on Netflix in the US.
It's on Netflix worldwide, coming out in March. Yeah.
What's that called?
Jo Nesbø's Harry Hole.
Oh, okay. Well, that's easy. So we'll make sure to check that out next month in March. That'll be super easy to find. I'm looking forward to checking that out. So, Joe, I really appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure. Like I said, I really enjoyed Wolf Hour. Listener, I encourage you to go check it out. Pick up a copy at your local Barnes& and Noble store or online at bn.com. Also, check out any of Joe's other backlist titles. He's got almost 30 years of books for you to go check out. I think you're going to enjoy them. And also make sure to check out the new Netflix series streaming in March. Um,
Thank
Joe,
you.
really appreciate your time. Thanks for everything.
You.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.